I know when it comes to the idea of pruning roses, every gardener has the exact same reaction. Yikes! It's really not that hard. It's nothing more than pruning a bush. Because what is a rose? It's just a bush with flowers. So if you pruned azaleas, if you pruned buddleias, you can prune a rose. I know you've heard about the complicated methods, and you know what I'm talking about. Bud eyes, Elmer's glue, 12 inches high, waxing moon, red underwear, and all that kinds of stuff. Understand this. That's for folks who exhibit roses. And they're after one very specific thing. They're looking for the specimen long stem rose to put on an exhibition table. And that's fine. Exhibitors are hardworking rose growers and very, very talented. But you're a gardener. You want a bush with lots of flowers. And this very simple pruning method we're going to show you is going to give you exactly that. Spectacular results of a bush with lots of flowers in your garden that'll complement all the other plants in your garden. Before we actually get into the pruning though, let's talk about when it's time to prune. If you live in a warm climate with no frost or freeze, you can prune pretty much any time. December, January is usually when we used to do it when I lived in Los Angeles. Now, I live in a cold climate now with a true freeze. I like to let Mother Nature tell me when it's time to prune. When the forsythia blooms around here, I know it's time to prune. Another good clue, watch your roses. When they start to bud out or leaf out, it's time to go ahead and prune your roses. Before we start the actual pruning, let's talk about tools. The most important thing that you need when you're working around roses is a really good set of gloves. I like gauntlet gloves because they go up your arm a little bit, protect you from thorns. Roses have thorns, there's no way around that. So start with a really good pair of gloves and invest in a good pair of gloves and invest in good tools. Go to jacksonperkins.com, see what they've got, find the stuff there. It's well worth the money because they'll last you a long, long time. So first, gloves. Next is a pair of pruners. Now you want to get pruners that have what's called a bypass blade. What is that? When the blades close, they bypass each other. That's what these do right here, okay? Anvil blades do this. They can crush a cane. Bypass blades make a very clean cut. This pair also has a rotating handle, which is really nice. That sort of takes some pressure off your wrist. So that's your next set of tools, is a really good set of pruners. The next thing you want to get, pair of loppers. It's just a pair of pruners with larger handles. These are great for thick canes. You've got a little more leverage with them. Again, bypass blade, pair of loppers. That's the next thing. The last tool you want is a folding saw. These are wonderful little folding saws like this. This allows you to get into the base of the plant in a tight place where it's too big for your loppers. You can get one of those really old canes out with this thing. So those are the basic tools that you need in order to do the roses. Now we come to the part that I know has been making your heart go a little pity-pat. We're actually going to prune the rose. It's not intimidating like I said before. We're going to take some very logical, very simple steps and just follow these steps as I do them and you'll have no trouble pruning your roses and they're going to look absolutely beautiful. So, step one, we're going to prune out dead wood. Just look for any wood that's dead. I've got some right here. And you know why we start with dead wood? Well, it gets you warmed up. You can start to get the dead wood up, get your juices flowing, get your secateurs going, and the best thing about pruning out dead wood, you can't make a mistake. Nobody ever prunes a piece of dead wood and goes, oh my gosh, I got to put it back. So start with the dead wood and then we'll go on to the next step. All the dead wood is now gone, and you can see I've taken out some pretty substantial pieces. The advantage to that as well is now that the dead wood is gone, I'm starting to see the structure of the plant itself. So that was step one, the dead wood. Step two, we're going to take out what I call thin growth, weak growth. That could be something like this, for example. Just something that really doesn't have a lot of structure to it, a lot of support. It's not really going to support a flower. Now you'll notice on this one there's actually not a lot of weak growth, and you know why? Because it's a Jackson and Perkins plant. But you didn't see that coming, did you? So we'll start with the weak growth. That's the next step. This will also start to clear away the plant a little bit so I can begin to see the structure a little bit more. So now, the weak growth. With the thin growth now gone, again, the bush is starting to reveal itself. I can see its shape. I can see how the growth is coming out. That's going to help me as I move on to my next step. Step three, we're going to take out crossing canes. What is a crossing cane? It's very simply a cane like this one that doesn't grow out this way from the center of the plant. It actually cuts across the plant. It clutters up the middle. It's not going to produce much blooms anyway. The chances are the canes can rub against each other and cause some damage. So the next thing we're going to do, check for crossing canes, and we'll get those out of here as well. We've done the first three steps. The next step is going to be the actual pruning itself. Now, one thing I want to talk about, you've heard the term prune to an outward facing bud eye. Well, what is a bud eye? That's the first place to begin, and why do you want to do it? Well, this is a bud eye. It's the little swelling that you see right here on the cane. And what that does is when you cut above that bud eye, the new growth grows in the direction of that bud eye. Let me say that again. The new growth grows in the direction of the bud eye that it's facing. That's important because that's how you can determine how the bush forms. If I cut bud eyes that are facing away from the center of the plant's going to grow out like this as it matures. If I cut them facing into the center of the plant, they're going to cross each other and you're going to get an awkward looking plant with a lot of crossing canes. So take that bud eye and you want to cut about 1/4 of an inch above it on one that faces away from the center of the plant. That's a real important key. Before we do the actual pruning, let's talk about the height you want to prune to. Here's my philosophy on that to keep it simple. Prune to the height you want it to be. If that bush is in the back of the border, you may want to prune a little higher. If it's in the front of the border, a little bit lower. However, here's a little tip that you might want to know about, particularly if you're growing hybrid teas. With hybrid teas in particular, the lower you prune, the bigger the flower, the longer the stem. The higher you prune, you're going to get more blooms, but they'll be a little bit smaller and slightly shorter stems. That's the reason why a lot of people who exhibit prune down to 12 inches because they want those long stems for the rose show. But if you want lots of flowers, leave them taller. You'll notice on this rose too that it's beginning to leaf out. We're having a very, very warm winter around here. It's okay to prune if the rose is leafing out. Don't worry about it. Or it's just like I talked about. Pick your frost date like 6-7 weeks before your last frost date and just go ahead and prune, leaves or not. So we know what the outward facing bud eye is. We're going to try to prune away from the center of the plant. I'm going to go about here because this is a floribunda. I want lots of flowers. So now we're going to go ahead and go at it. And you can see what I'm doing. I'm just looking for an outward facing bud eye and I'm basically pruning to it, working with a fairly consistent height. And I'm not worrying too much about anything else. And I'm doing this, watching you, keeping me with me on this, because I want you to see that I'm not fussing about this thing at all. I'm just going at it. And I'm just going to prune my rose. There's an outward facing eye there. If the eye doesn't face dead away from the center of the plant, don't worry about it. Just get something that kind of faces away from the center. And basically, folks, that is a pruned rose bush. That's basically all you need to do to prune a rose for your home garden. You've probably heard a lot more complicated methods of pruning. Well, that's for folks who exhibit. They need to do that. That takes a lot of hard work and a lot of skill. But for you, the homeowner, those simple steps: dead wood, thin growth, crossing canes, outward facing bud eye, cut to the height you want, and that's all you need to do. Also, it's really important to remember, roses like to be pruned. So it's better to prune than not to prune. So if you think it's too late, still go ahead and prune. That's really important. Before we go, I want to talk just a little bit about pruning climbing roses. The same basic rules apply, the dead growth, weak growth, that kind of stuff. But there's a couple rules about climbing roses that you need to know before you prune them. So we're going to head over to a different part of the garden and tackle a climbing rose. With climbing roses, like I said, the same rules apply, dead growth, weak growth, that kind of thing. But before you begin, you need to know something real important. That's the difference between main canes and laterals. Here's the thing. Main canes grow from the base of the plant. They form the structure. Laterals are the side shoots that grow off that main cane. You can see them right here, okay? Never cut the main cane back. Why? Because climbers put their energy into growing first. They want to get to the size they want to be, then they're going to flower. Think of a fruit tree, okay? You plant a fruit tree, in the first 3 or 4 years it doesn't bear fruit because it's just doing all its growing. That's why you don't cut the main canes back. However, the laterals, you can cut back all season long, anywhere within 12 to 14 inches of the main cane. They're the ones that bear the flowers. So by trimming those laterals back, that's going to give you more flowers. So again, here's my main cane, right here, and here are my laterals. So all I'm going to do is I can simply trim these laterals and don't worry about which way the bud eye faces. On a climbing cane, that's completely irrelevant. So again, just to recap, don't cut the main cane and you can cut the laterals, and that's all there is to pruning climbers. For Jackson and Perkins, this is Paul Zimmerman, and thank you for spending time in the garden with us today.